Hello, Michael Mann from BikeSocial here, and welcome to my garage. I shall be joined very shortly by motorcycle testing royalty. We've got John Milbank, Simon Hargreaves and Martin Fitz-Gibbons as we aim to find out which is the best current middleweight naked bike. We've got the long-time category king, the Yamaha MT-07. We've got the recently rejuvenated and revitalised KTM 790 Duke, and the new for 2023 Suzuki GSX 8S and the Honda Hornet. We shall each be taking each bike for a test route that will take in some of Cambridge's finest roads. I say finest, good for testing. We've got some bumpy bits, some fast bits, some slow bits, some town bits, and so on. Ideal for these bikes. Okay, so we're each going to do that, and then we'll come back and talk to you all about it. Okay, men, we've done a lap each on each bike, and well, let's talk about the route, shall we? It was all right, wasn't it? It worked out okay. Yeah. It was sort of an all.
It was bumpy.
It
was a thorough test.
So
good suspension test.
Yeah, yeah, but it had a mixture, didn't it? There was fast bits, slow bits, nudgery bits, fast corners, slow corners, town, blah blah blah.
It was very, very real world, I think, is a good assessment of it. It certainly wasn't some idyllic European countryside blessed with 30-degree sunshine and empty roads. It was proper, real British A road and B road.
Good, all right, well, let's work through each of the different elements and then we'll talk about each bike. So chip in when you want, as opposed to championing one bike each. Price and value and sort of a PCP deal. Worked out on little cheat sheets that, you know, if you were to put a £1,500 deposit down, 36 months, at 4,000 miles per year, then the prices are very, very similar, as you'd expect. There's not a great deal, but 16 quid difference, I think, between all four of them. So, you know, when we're talking about an overall price, it actually doesn't work out that much difference. But the MT-07, Mufka, let's start with you. The MT-07's been around for a while now, hasn't it? And it's still priced.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because the MT-07 is now £7,510, which is a lot more. I think so. It came out in 2014, I think, and it was just over £5,000 then, 5.3, I think. So it's gone up quite a lot. It's no longer kind of it's not competitive on price, I think, in this class. It's gone from being like a real bargain, great value for money bike. I think if you scale up 5,300 for whatever it is, 8, 9, 10 years worth of inflation, you get to £7,000. Yeah. And it's now 500 quid more than that. So where it was kind of the default choice for being great value for money, I think, especially with these three other bikes that have come in new for this year, it's got a job on its hands.
Which is slightly strange because the KTM in some ways has kind of gone the other way.
Yes.
In a sense. It's, you know, that started out as the, like, what was that, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
2018, I think.
I can't remember the exact price, but it was certainly more substantial than its current price now, which is what, 8,000 to...
Yeah, when that came out, that was 8,500. So it's now 500 quid less than it was in 2018. So it's like reverse inflation. It's deflated.
Which is kind of why it's kind of now in the class and it's now competing with the MT-07.
Of course, it never used to, really, was it?
Because it never really used to. It was always kind of like slightly cut above. Found its way down there. And then you've got the Suzuki, most expensive bike here, I think.
8155.
Yeah.
It's still relatively to what, you know, I'm not going to go, oh, that's cheap, I'll have two. But relatively to what bikes and cars are costing, it's still at the lower end, kind of.
I just wonder if Suzuki kicked themselves a bit when they saw the pricing, when they saw the price of the Hornet.
Yeah, 6,999, yeah.
That's the real big surprise of the year, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, Honda have been teasing a new Hornet and a parallel twin Hornet for quite a few years. Well, since 2020, 2021? Yeah. Like, quite a few years. And I think it was kind of a slightly lukewarm reaction to it, right up until the bit where they said it's going to be 6,999 on the road, no sort of hidden costs and charges. And that really makes you pay attention to it, because for less than £7,000 to have a brand new Honda with 90 horsepower and a load of gadgets.
750.
Yeah.
It was a headline. It was a headline grabber, wasn't it, when that was announced?
Massively so.
And then Suzuki went, hang on a minute.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so Suzuki's got a slightly different approach to it, which is everything's thrown in rather than being an optional extra on a tick sheet, isn't it? So it's got the quick shifter as standard, which the other 3 bikes make you pay extra for.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're going to compare like for like, it does require a little bit of mental gymnastics to kind of compare them on a level. So the Suzuki's the most expensive, but arguably you get more for your money.
But the quick shift's only 240 quid on the Hornet.
That is true.
And I'm probably jumping ahead now. But it's so good, the quick shifter on that. It's awesome. It is.
We are jumping ahead because I want to argue with you.
Okay.
Don't forget the Suzuki's also got a detachable subframe. Ah, yeah, that's not really. That's not on the. You're not going to take it off road, are you? No, all right, fair enough.
On raw price, the Hornet is the most appealing, just on raw price.
Yeah.
And the Suzuki's asking the most, but perhaps offers more as well.
And all these prices are on the road prices, so it includes your first registration and tax. All right, moving on, engine and performance. So, well, who wants to start? They're all parallel twins. I'll start. There you are.
They are all parallel twins. An engine that a couple of years ago, or 10, 20 years ago, was kind of the run to the litter, really, wasn't it? Yeah. It wasn't a big popular format. Everyone wanted inline 4s. And then in the past, what, 5, 10 years?
Post-credit crunch?
Post-credit crunch, as emissions get harder and harder. So, I mean, suddenly it's become the default engine, isn't it? You need to have a parallel twin in your range.
Ubiquitous.
So the MT, once again, is probably the oldest engine here. It hasn't changed, I don't think, in kind of spec or output or anything since 2014. So it's still a 689cc parallel twin.
Yeah, it is the smallest engine
It's the smallest here, and unsurprisingly, it's the least torquey and the least powerful if you go on peak figures. So again, when that bike landed, remember it came into a class that was SV650 from Suzuki and Kawasaki ER6N or Z650. Yeah. And so this had more capacity than them, more power than them, more torque than them. And this was the superstar of the class.
It really grabbed that crown, didn't it?
But I think everyone's decided if they're going to compete with it, they're going to go bigger.
Bigger, yeah.
And retaining that A2 compliance as well, importantly.
Yeah, so which is sort of weird because when the KTM 790 Duke first came out, it couldn't be made A2 compliant. It was 105 horsepower back in 2018. And what's the cap for A2? It's like 94, I think.
94, which the KTM is.
So this one, now reintroduced, is now 94 horsepower.
But it's still the most powerful in this class, this new class.
Yes.
It's also the most torquey by a long way.
Yeah.
64.2 pound-foot.
And then what else have we got? So the Honda is what, 755cc, so it's kind of slightly less. But it is quite a revvy engine, and it's making what, 90?
90.5.
90.5, yeah, which, you know, is pretty close to the KTM. But yeah, definitely the most peaky engine here, I think.
I think kind of the surprise on paper is the Suzuki, because it's got a big engine capacity-wise, 776. But the power output is perhaps a little bit lower than you might have expected.
It's a shade under 82 versus the Honda at 90.
Yeah.
Which again, on paper, people started looking at the prices as a comparison, then looking at the peak power as a comparison. Yeah. But actually, on the road, there's a big difference, isn't there? It's only where it makes its power.
We're talking about the Suzuki?
Yeah, it's Suzuki versus the Honda.
Yeah, because the Suzuki definitely feels immediate, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. But you would. The first thing you said when you got off the Suzuki was to say, "Well, hang on, I'm not getting all my throttle is wasted. I'm not getting the top end of the throttle." What was that about then?
It felt to me like the throttle had been mapped to, because obviously it's ride by wire, so you've just got a potentiometer, volume control is a good way you put it, and it was as if it had been mapped to use only about the first 3/4 of the travel, and then the rest of it, like just leave that, don't bother doing anything. Like it hit 100%. Felt to me like it hit 100% by about 3/4 of the travel of the throttle. It might be because I was always at the back. I think I'm being generous. I probably ride 75, 80% of what you guys can ride. So I'm often playing catch up. So I'm coming out of a corner and going, what's that? And I ended up riding it going, no difference.
Nothing up
Yeah,
there.
but early, it's like, whoa, this thing goes. But then there's nothing. I think you explained it better.
Well, this is it. But that before we get to that chimes in with the dyno curves that we have seen for that bike.
Yeah.
Which for the Suzuki, which show that it sort of does its power and does its torque, and then it gets to I don't know, what is that, 6, 7, 8,000 RPM or something? And then it just tails off and it flatlines while the other engines keep climbing. And so you put the two together and described it perfectly with your massive brain and explained it. What was the explanation?
The way it feels on the road is it feels really grunty at the bottom end and in the mid-range, and it feels relatively flat at the top end. It feels like it makes its peak power at 8,000 revs. Actually, there probably is a cheat sheet that will tell me what it is. 8.5, and it feels like it sits there, absolutely flat power to the red line. And so if your riding behaviour suits big throttle openings and high revs, it can feel a little lackluster. It can feel a little flat at the top end. My suspicion is basically the throttle bodies are not being held fully open all the way to the red line. They're either being closed early electronically, or they're never fully opening. I don't know what it is. We'd need to pull it apart and have a good look at it. But it does fit in, you're right, the whole thing fits in with the character of the bike, which is the Suzuki feels like a grunter and not a screamer.
I do just want to say, though, it's not just for me flattening off at the top of the rev range, because I was trying this at all rev positions. So, and obviously I know the difference where it's running out of go. And even something like the Hornet, I think that was the last one I noticed it. And other bikes have ridden. You wind it on, and there might not be much more there, but you can hear and feel the engine change, trying. So it goes, whoa, and it's not giving you a sudden lurch forward. But on the Suzuki, it's like there is nothing. I can't hear anything change.
From 8,000 RPM, you were on the down slope of the torque curve.
But this can be at 6,000, 4,000 RPM. And you know, you're winding it on, but I can be at 4,000 RPM, and then the difference between 75% throttle and 100% throttle is nothing.
Still nothing there.
So I can't, even if you're bogging an engine down by over fueling it, it felt like nothing happened. So I think your analogy of they've opened the throttles fully and they're just not doing anything more with your throttle power.
Which then, as you said, does beg the question, well, why have they engineered it like that?
What happens if they've created an engine that they know they want to do more with in the future on future models, be it a GSX-8R potentially, or whatever, you know, a sports bike or a touring bike or something where they want more torque or more power that's there, and all they've got to do is go...
Or equally, the second generation of that engine just gets a little bit more at the top.
So the rest of the throttle might do something later on.
It's great, isn't it? They don't actually have to develop the bike. They just do a bit more noughts and ones, and there it is. Look, there's a new engine, updated, possibly, yeah.
By contrast, the Honda Hornet feels, well, kind of effectively the polar opposite of the Suzuki. That is a bike that rewards a rider who's prepared to hold the throttle on the stop and hold the motor until it revs all the way out to, I think it's the highest revving, isn't it? It goes all the way to 10 or 10 and a bit.
10. If only it was 11.
And it definitely rewards you for doing so.
And it sounds good while it's doing it too, though.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that its peak power is 9.5, so yeah.
It's the best sounding engine here when you're revving it.
From the rider's point of view, I think. Yeah.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Even on the downshift.
Just one last thing on those two. Really interesting me to compare them because, you know, like you're saying, you have got these kind of opposite ideas. And for me, when I was riding them in isolation, I felt the Suzuki engine was more usable, more fun because it had that bottom end. But having ridden them back to back, we were talking about which one would be quicker if we took them to a track day. And I was kind of, well, maybe the Suzuki because it's got the bottom end. Not a chance. The Honda would kill it because it's so revvy and it's so fast. It's much, much quicker than the Suzuki, that engine. Then it comes down to taste, which you prefer to use. But I think empirically, the Honda has got the legs on the Suzuki. I
think it comes down to taste, but also where you're riding and how you choose to ride. Yeah. And I think they're also really important things because while they're kind of playing like a little dance with each other, doing opposite things, the KTM is just more torquey, more powerful, whatever you want to do with it, however you want to ride it. It's not even, and I was really surprised, it's not even like the kind of a big screaming engine. Like I think it's got the shortest rev ceiling out of all of them. It feels like it stumbles into its rev limiter earlier. But boy, it's rewarding and exciting all the way through it, isn't it? Yeah. It's got an engine that feels like it's got kind of really light internals. It spins up really eagerly and really quickly, but it's not anywhere near as harsh or spiky or unsubstantial as I was expecting it to feel. It's been quite a few years since I've ridden a 790 Duke, and I'd forgotten that they were that smooth and refined and civilised and well-behaved. Really impressed by that.
Yeah, I thought so too. It's almost like it combines the attributes of both of those. You know, it's got the bottom end and it's got the top end. And it is more aggressive. It's definitely, the throttle response is much more not less novice friendly, but you know what I mean.
It's a bit more spicy.
It's constantly egging you on. He wants you to go.
But even I left it in. Sorry, so I left it in third through towns, and I thought it was fine because you said about it. I was like, oh, is it going to be? And actually, before I forget the Hornet, I thought as you roll off, it's got a little bit of a chop off, and you know that thing where it goes boom, boom. Not bad.
Not as much as the Yamaha.
Yeah. I was really impressed with that KTM.
Yeah, me too.
Everything about it is smooth, I think. Everything was really, really, I think it was nice. I think it was very user-friendly. But because it's got so much power at 0% throttle, it is lively, but it's easy to use.
Yeah, but it's very exciting as well. Everything we've said just recently sounds like we're going, oh, it's just a very nice bike. It's very civilised. No. It's awesome.
All four of us would have ridden that lap faster on that bike because you instantly get on it and go, oh, this is good. Right, you know, it stimulates you.
You were at the front all the time. I was at the back all the time. You started on the MT-07 and I started on the KTM and then we cycled through. So obviously we ended up swapped. And the difference for me between when we went out the first time, I had to work to keep up with you, but I felt like I had a chance of keeping up a bit on the final pass. And we all know these roads, so it's not like learning the road. On the final, no chance. But that's more down to handling, so we'll get there.
You said the same, didn't you? You were following me on each of those 4 laps. Yeah. You could just tell.
You could just tell as soon as you're on the KTM. I could hear you saying, oh, this is it. This is it. You know, even though that was the last bike you rode, you know, so you're a bit jaded because you've done this lap 4 times. You think, all right, that's the end of the day. No, you loved it. You could tell.
Yeah, I mean, I am a performance rider. I do enjoy the excitable throttle, the liveliness and that kind of nature of a bike and of an engine, and I like to hear it. And it's almost whistling to you. I don't know if you noticed, but you can hear it as you.
I could hear it when I was following you. It's the only bike that I could actually hear the exhaust when I was sitting behind you. I could hear what was going on.
I think it's a shame. Perhaps some of that noise doesn't get through to the rider then, because for my money, the one slight downside to the KTM's engine is I don't think it sounds that special from on board.
I think it sounds better than the Suzuki. To me,
I wouldn't argue that, but I think it sounds quite sort of tinny and quite trebly, and it doesn't have a lot of kind of bassy stomp to it, which I think the Honda does offer.
The Honda's got a proper bark, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The Honda reminds me a little bit of the sound of my VFR. It's got that, there's something about
an airbox growl.
Yeah, they've done a good job of it.
And it sort of leaves the Yamaha as the one nobody wants to talk about, which feels really unkind because it is a phenomenal engine. It has been a phenomenal engine, and it has for 10 years been the best engine in its class by a country mile.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But unfortunately, it is plain and simply outgunned by these 3 newbies.
Because the class has left it behind slightly. It's gone from the top to the bottom.
So I think kind of anything we say about the MT-07 does need to be caged a little bit with, like, if you've got an MT-07, it's not suddenly become a bad bike. Yeah. It is still a riot of a thing in isolation. Yeah. But the reason we bring these bikes together is because it is a choice that people make. And yeah, unfortunately now it is slightly underpowered and slightly outgunned by all 3 other bikes.
Just a quick point on that, actually. In terms of other bikes here, other bikes we could have chosen to join these 3, 4, 2, possibly. What else would you have done if you had to pick each?
Wow.
Trident.
What I'm saying is there's a lot of options.
Triumph Trident, I think, is a competitor for all of these, I think.
Absolutely. I think you'd probably also throw in the Aprilia Tuono 660.
Agreed.
Yes, you would, yeah.
As a bit of a, probably not quite as well-known or big seller, but definitely another interesting choice from Parallel Twin.
Probably more expensive as well.
Probably.
Are we keeping with the same engine layout?
Whatever you like.
Well, I was just thinking of a Monster or something.
This sort of character, yeah. The Ducati Monster, yeah. It's on the list.
And there's some really, really weird choices. You could have CF Moto 800 has just been announced.
Yeah. Does the KTM kind of cover that, or is it?
Well, we haven't addressed that particular elephant in the room yet, have we?
Well, the only other ones I had on my list were, all of the above, F900R.
F900R, yeah.
Or even Street Triple 765. But the point is that there are lots of other competitors for this. What are we going to call it? I've got Midi Naked written down here, but...
I think that's a great name, yeah, because if you call them middleweights, people complain, because it's like, my bike's not a middleweight, it's a full-size motorbike. So yeah, I like Midi Naked, I quite like that.
It is crazy, isn't it? We often see it on Facebook and that, don't we? People talk about it. Somebody says, a great bike for a beginner. It's like, this is a great bike for anybody.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the magic of this class for me, is that they're supposed to suit all riders of all ability levels. And, it would be really easy to be a little bit patronising, a little bit condescending and say, oh, you just passed your test, you'd be really good in a Hornet, which would be true. But also, been riding 25 years, you'd be really good in a Hornet.
There are two bikes here that give me an impression of riding something that is definitely a class below the other two in terms of its size and its presence. And so there's two of them that sort of sit in this slightly Christmas cracker kind of class, I think. And there are two that feel more like these are fully grown motorcycles. Don't know if you want to talk about that now. Maybe we'll talk about that when we get to riding positions and things like that.
Well, let's move on to riding position. How about that?
All right, fair enough.
Hey, Si, which of the two bikes do you think are...
I think the Hornet and I think the MT-07, when I sit on them, I'm quite a big geezer, and I sit on them and I kind of feel a tiny bit self-conscious.
How tall are you? I think we should, because it annoys people, don't they?
6 foot, and you're not getting my weight.
I'm 5'10".
5'9".
6 foot, 14 and a half stone.
And we're all fairly average leg lengths for our heights and stuff.
So when I sit on the Honda and the Yamaha, I feel a little bit kind of self-conscious because I feel like my proportions are a little bit large for these two bikes. They're very slim, they're very petite, they're very small, and my knees are too close together, and it's all kind of a bit like, Whereas when I ride the Suzuki and I ride the KTM, but specifically the Suzuki, I feel like this is a bigger bike. It fits me, the proportions in my head, which is a really important thing, I think, for people buying bikes, that fits better.
The trade-off of that, the flip side of that, is that if you're a shorter rider or a smaller rider or a less well-built rider and you kind of feel a little bit nervous about riding a 200-kilo bike, then perhaps the Honda or the Yamaha would be a bit more manageable, whereas the Suzuki, which is, the heaviest bike here by quite a margin, and like you said, it feels the longest, it feels the widest, it feels the most substantial, would perhaps feel a little bit more of a handful.
202 kilos, I'm looking at the cheat sheet now, look, and that's 12 kilos heavier than the next, which is the Honda. These are all claimed figures, of course, from each of the manufacturers. I agree. I started the day on the Suzuki and I moved to the Hornet, and I felt immediately that my preconception was that it should feel a more comfortable bike. It's a Honda after all, but in actually, for our frame, I felt as though the peg to seat height was a little, not cramped, but it's shorter. And also I felt like I was, again, it's margins, such fine margins, I was reaching a little bit further toward the bar. Yeah. And they've got the KTM and it feels such an aggressive place, isn't it? You don't want to be sitting at the back because you just slide forwards. And it's harder and it's taller and you've got a bit more weight in your wrists.
The thing with the Hornet is that, you know how these bikes are engineered as platforms? And so if Honda are going to release 3 versions of the Hornet, they've already designed them, they already know what they're going to be. One of them's a Transalp, one of them's the Hornet. It feels like the riding position is kind of compromised to a CBR 750, which might be coming at some point. Do you know what I mean? Because that peg-seat relationship is so sporty. To me, when I rode it on the launch, I thought, yeah, they're definitely going to make a sports version of this because this feels like, put clip-ons on it and it's already there.
Yeah. There is a big difference when you jump on the KTM in terms of leg room, in terms of knee angle. I've got a dodgy knee from a silly accident a few years ago, and so it doesn't bend very well, and I really notice knee angles and bum to heel space, which I think the KTM offers quite a lot.
MT-07 and the Hornet being good for maybe a slightly shorter rider. The only thing I'd say with that is I didn't, at 5'10", I didn't really notice the riding positions that much on any of them except the MT-07, which I thought the pegs felt a bit high, and I felt not overly cramped, but I felt them a bit high, and I think sometimes as an inexperienced rider or a nervous rider, although you can get your feet down, if you've got your feet up high, it sometimes feels higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So between the two, I feel like this would be, if somebody was a bit nervy about it, that feels like you brought your feet up a long way. I mean, they're fine on it, but I just felt a little bit cramped on that. The KTM, the pegs are weirdly angled. They're kind of, instead of being like that, they're angled like that. And when we just started riding, my foot fell off it. And that feels like you are really over it.
The KTM, well, it's a higher seat, and you feel like it's higher relative to the rest of the bike. You sort of sit on it.
Yeah. The bars feel quite low.
The bars are quite low, aren't they? So you have got that kind of ready to race, more aggressive stance, I think. Whereas the other three, you tend to sit in them a bit more.
Yeah. It was definitely marketed as what they called it, the scalpel, didn't they? So it was obviously an apex hugger or whatever. But and did you say something earlier on about you can move the bars? Can you?
Yeah, I mean you could rotate any of them, and I didn't know whether that would just give you a slightly different front end feel.
Do look like they're pitched when you could rotate them a little bit.
But the seating angle really, sorry, the seating position, the riding position really does suit the bike, because you want to, as we said, it's got the performance, and you want to ride it like it's supposed to be ridden. It's very rewarding.
It's very good.
Handling, suspension and weight was a bit of a broad category.
The MT-07 is just comedy. No, it's not. No, comedy would make it seem fun.
The MT-07, it's fair to say, has never been renowned for the quality of its suspension, even going back to the day it was launched. And I think, again, as the class has moved on and perhaps the bike hasn't evolved much in 10 years, I think these three bikes show up the relative cheapness of the MT-07 suspension, sort of brighter than ever. Like, the focus is more on the fact that this is the only bike here with right way up forks. It's the only bike here with damper rod internals. I'm pretty sure they all have cartridges. The shock has never been the most compliant thing in the world, and it feels extra pogo-y relative to three bikes that kind of
it really feels underdamped, doesn't it?
It does, but can I be a bit controversial? I don't think the Honda's all that much better.
No, I thought the Honda gets messy when you're pushing hard.
It gets proper. It's the only one here that had me like, oh, I've got to back off a bit here.
But you do ride hard.
Yeah, but the others didn't. Not even the Yamaha. They were, because that's faster.
Yeah, I suppose.
That's got the top end. It keeps going, and that's the bit. There's an area where it starts to go like, whoa. There was a couple of times where it was almost tank slapping when I was following you. There's bits where there were some crests that would come over where the bike's leaning a bit. That thing would come down and it would give a proper big shimmy. Those two shimmy a lot. They're constantly doing this. But that one does it at that extra top, with the extra performance, it makes it a bit more...
That felt less likely to slap to me, the MT-07.
Yeah,
but there were times when there was an S-bend we went through at one point, and it was quite chattery, and that it wasn't going all over the place, but it just felt so out... Not out of control, it just felt so uncontrolled. Didn't feel dangerous, it just felt unpleasant.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, that's the one that made me kind of like, only one that made me roll off.
Don't push hard. This was quite comfortable.
It's nice, it's soft, isn't it?
But not soft as in wallowy and rubbish. That just had no redeeming for me. The MT-07 sadly had no redeeming handling, whereas this was like, okay, well, if you're not going to go silly, it's actually pretty good. I think it felt all right. That made me make noises a lot. No, not happy noises. Lots of, as you're hitting bumps. That was proper crashy. But I can see why you like it, because it feels sporty, it feels planted, it feels still not as good as KTM, but
yeah, we're going to get to that, aren't we? Yeah, we're all going to get to that.
As long as you didn't go silly, actually, it was an enjoyable, pleasant ride. Whereas when I finished the lap on the MT-07, I know it was the last one I rode. I was still like on the bumpy. We were doing bumpy roads, but they're the roads I love riding. Some of the footage we've got is of a proper bumpy road. That wasn't typical of what we were doing all the time.
I think the Suzuki's really interesting. I think it's a classic Suzuki. It sits really flat, and it's got a lot of what I call sort of cornering stability, in that it's got a rate of turn. When it gets to the point in the corner that you want it to be at, it doesn't want to fall over, it doesn't want to come back, it doesn't pitch, it just sort of sits there. It's quite solid, and it's quite... And yes, I agree, the suspension quality probably isn't... Well, it definitely isn't up as with the KTM. But in terms of confidence in the corner, it's definitely got more stability than that in the corner, because in the corner, the front end's moving around. I was watching the clocks sort of like just move slightly. It's always got something's going on with that front end. Yeah. It feels a little bit like, it's not a shopping trolley, but you know, like the rake, it feels like it's got a really steep rake, and the front's constantly kind of like wanting to go into sort of like a self-oscillation thing. It's not a huge criticism, and you're right, it is right at the top end. Yeah. But it doesn't feel as confident or as planted as the Suzuki.
Mufka, what do you reckon? If you were going to go and do that route again and you were carrying, I don't know, 12 dozen eggs?
With the aim of bringing some of them back. I think the best ride quality is the KTM for the route that we've done today, which was, yes, very bumpy in places, and where it was smooth, we were able to push on a little bit. The KTM, which has WP, I guess, they own the company, so why not use it? It does feel like it takes some of the harshness out over some of the really big bumps. So I think that you still feel the impact, you still feel the compression, but the transition from compression to rebound feels a lot better managed, and the rebound feels a lot juicier. It feels a lot more kind of like there's some oil damping going on. And so it doesn't kind of go into a bump and then fire you out the seat. it kind of goes into a bump, and then the transition to kind of expanding again feels a lot more grown up, and then it kind of expands a lot more slowly. So there are times when I was following you on the MT-07, so you were riding the MT-07, I was on the KTM, and I watched as you were being fired out of the seat and banging over the bumps, and I was bracing myself thinking, this is going to hurt. And on the KTM, it didn't. It just made less of a meal of some of the really bad bumps.
I agree with what you said earlier on, by the way, about, and I made the note earlier about getting off the Suzuki and onto the Honda and it feeling just a little bit springy at the back.
Yes.
It wasn't necessarily massively uncomfortable, but it and the Yamaha made me stand up on the pegs a bit. Because by the time we've done several laps, you kind of know where the bigger bumps are, don't you? Or the series of bumps.
I think unquestionably you put KTM best suspension, you put Suzuki second best suspension, and then you can kind of argue about Honda and Yamaha. I'd put Honda above Yamaha.
I'd put Honda.
Yeah, I would, yeah.
But then in terms of handling, I mean, handling's slightly different from suspension, isn't it? Yeah. The Honda feels really quick steering. Yeah. It's got like no effort to change direction. No. And I think part of that is that it's the only one here with a fairly skinny rear tyre. It's got a 160 section rear tyre where I think all the others have a 180.
180/55, yeah.
So the Honda, by design, by accident, whether they were trying to compete with the sort of light flickability of the MT-07, is really easy to change direction. And I was surprised that even the Scalpel is slightly more steady in the rate at which it changes direction than the Honda. I think if you were to, say, go and ride around a set of corners as quick as possible, you'd probably have the KTM, probably have the Suzuki second, but I thought maybe the ground clearance on the Suzuki was a little surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I've not decked it out, but I think it is quite possible to deck the Suzuki probably before the others, I would have thought. Well, maybe not the Yam. Yeah, that's how it feels. KTM is the winner.
Brakes. Any thoughts on brakes? Was there anything that stood out?
Yeah, I'm going to say this is one area where I thought the KTM wasn't.
I'm absolutely with you on that. That's the only thing that I mentioned, something negative about it.
I feel like both in terms of initial bite and ultimate power, the KTM with its own brand brakes, KTM branded, I think they're probably J. Joanne calipers, we think, the logo on the back.
Yeah, look like it.
But they don't have the bite of the brakes on the rest of the bikes here.
Even over the Honda, do you reckon?
Thought all the others, much of a muchness, but the only one that I started writing down any kind of notes about the brakes was the KTM. And I got off that and thought...
There's two things I noticed about the KTM. The first one is isn't that actually a radial master cylinder? I can't quite work out whether it is or not. It looks like it is. Yeah, and the other one is that it's got an ABS mode where you can go into super and some people can just lock the back up and skid it everywhere.
Why would you want to do that, Si?
Because it smells good and it sounds good. And it looks good when he's doing it.
Once you've done it 2 or 3 times, the novelty wears off. And also, if you own the bike, you want to be wrecking your rear.
You go looking for the kind of tarmac that makes it squeal the most.
That was good fun.
Brakes-wise, yeah, I thought I agreed they were much of a muchness. I didn't really even notice that the KTMs weren't that good, to be honest. I thought.
No, I must admit.
But you probably didn't use them much.
Well, I used the back brake quite a lot.
The Honda, I thought, was the one that felt slightly softer brakes to me. But then I fiddled with the span, pushed it out, and then they're fine. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Honda's got the smallest discs diameters.
But they're wavy!
Yeah, oh, right, that's probably why then.
KTM 300s, Honda's 296, Suzuki 310, and Yamaha 298. They're all different.
The only other thing worth mentioning about brakes is that the MT-07, again, feels like I'm picking on it, don't mean to. If you are interested in such things, doesn't have radially mounted brake calipers.
Of course not.
Which again, it might be a fashion thing, it might be a function thing, but they look previous generation tech.
And they're the only ones that are semi-monoblocks.
Ooh. Now that is a nerdy detail. Yeah.
And they're the only ones mounted to right way up forks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good grief.
How do we ever survive
I
these
don't
days?
have a fact to add to that. Equipment, rider aids, gadgetry.
The easiest one to talk about is the Yamaha, again, because there's nothing, there's no modes, there's no traction control, there is ABS, I don't think you can turn it off.
None of these have got corner ABS, have they?
The KTM does.
Ooh.
But in terms of spec and gadgetry and rider aids, the Yamaha is the simplest. There is ABS, and there's indicators, and there's a horn.
Rider modes?
No.
That particular model that we rode today has got the optional quick shifter, hasn't it, as well? But it's only up.
Up only?
Yeah.
And then the others are all traction control and various, some have got riding modes.
Yes.
The Suzuki hasn't got riding modes, but you do select throttle response curves.
A, B and C.
That's surely a riding mode, isn't it?
Well, no, because if you were, say, riding in the rain suddenly, you can't switch to a rain mode. You'd maybe want to switch to the throttle mode C, but you'd also want to change the traction control to go up higher. So you'd probably want to do, it's 2 actions rather than 1.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a bit.
I like the fact that you can change it all on the fly as well. You can turn traction control off just while you're riding.
While you're riding? On the Suzuki? That's unusual.
The Honda's a bit more conventional in that it gives you pre-packaged rider settings, doesn't it? So it's got I can't even remember, is there a rain and a street and a sport and a... Tell you what, shall I check some notes? I'll tell you what they are.
There's also the user ones, aren't there, where you can do what you want to. You don't call it traction control, they call it torque control, but it's traction control. And power and...
It's got sport, standard, rain and user, which all kind of really self-explanatory and intuitive to use. So I quite like that. You can fiddle around with them.
And the KTM's got sport, street, rain and track.
Now, there might be some of those that you might have to pay extra for.
Street.
I'm pretty sure the track is part of a track pack, which is part of an optional extra with KTM.
Okay.
It does get very confusing, doesn't it, with KTM? And they talk about demo mode being available for the first 1,500 kilometres. So
That doesn't apply to this, does it?
yeah, the one that we've got here. And then if Sir Ramadan would like to continue using all of those add-ons, then you've got to pay for them, of course, at 1,500 kilometres. Right.
Yes, on the KTM, if you want track pack, that is £361.51. If you want a quick shifter up and down, that is another £361.51. If you want MSR, I think that's what they add to Chinese food to make it taste good, isn't it? That's £153.16. There's Bluetooth connectivity, another £126.
Hang on, where are we? We're over £1,000 now, aren't we?
There's cruise control. Incidentally, the only bike that you can spec cruise control as an option. £252.79 plus you need to get a new switchgear cluster, which is another £89.70.
Oh.
And there's also a tech pack, which aims to bundle together the track pack, quick shifter and MTC, which is £723.97. So basically, you have an awful lot of ability to spec it up how you want to spec it up. And conveniently, and also quite a lot of ability to give KTM some more money.
But the track pack, would we, because I rode it in sport mode all the time. It was on track when I got on it. I turned that off and put it on sport. I thought, I don't know what
Where are you going with this? Track mode is different to track pack.
Yeah, so what is track pack?
Track pack includes track mode, as well as MTC, so traction control adjustment, throttle response adjustment, launch control, and the ability to turn the anti-wheelie off, separate from the traction control. So it's pretty high level gadgetry going on there.
Yeah.
I think you'd need to be quite a sort of determined, committed, spirited rider before you need to start worrying
And
about
some of it is hardware and some of it is software. New switchgear is hardware.
The switchgear is hardware. I guess the quick shifter.
The quick shifter, and I would get the quick shifter.
It's worth every penny, sure.
It's lovely and slick, isn't it?
It is good, yeah.
Just doesn't sound as good as that one.
It's smooth as butter. It really is gorgeous, isn't it? You can feel the clicker, but it does such little effort to go up and down. I think it's tremendous.
Quick shifters, I think the Suzuki's is the least aggressive and it is the most sane. I think the Honda's is much sharper. I think when you're absolutely pounding the Honda, it's brilliant, especially the downshift.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
When you're not gunning it, I think it's a little bit kind of like direct and quite harsh when you're not absolutely going back crazy on it. And the KTM, the MT-07 is kind of like, well, you know, I'd probably rather not have it, to be honest. And that's really good.
I think it's been, we have been spoiled though, haven't we? Because you keep putting your foot on it and going, no, I ain't got a downshifter. We've been spoiled by quick shifters. I remember when Yamaha were doing the launches, we went on the launch of the new whatever it was, they went, oh, it's got a quick shifter now. We're like, oh yeah, great. And you're like, oh, this is cool. Now we're like, ain't got a downshift.
You made a good point though, that the Yamaha hasn't got it because it's still got a
throttle cable. Yeah. Do you remember them from off of history? Along with fuel taps and...
Because you see that on a lot of Yamahas, but we talked about this, didn't we? That is a throttle cable to the throttle bodies. Whereas on stuff like the MT-07, I think it's got the Yamaha...
MT-09.
Yeah, maybe. Sorry, yeah, I was going to say MT-10, that's what I meant to say, but yeah, the other ones. It's YCCT, is it? Something like that? But it's the cable goes to a potentiometer. So it just
pretty much sacked most of that off now. I think they're pretty much all on full rubber wire, which is what the other three bikes here are, which kind of is why they're able to have this higher next generation level of rider aids, including sophisticated traction control and lean sensitive brakes and two-way quick shifters. So Again, I know there's a lot of riders who are very cynical and very suspicious about rider aids. Don't need any of that, mate. Here's my traction control and all the rest. But I have to say, I would definitely have everything on all the other 3 bikes. And I felt like I was missing out when I was on the MT-07 today, I'm afraid.
I felt like, yeah, we've all talked about it already, or you guys have talked about it. The upshift on that is a quick shift, is very much first generation, isn't it? It's clunky, and downshift, obviously, it doesn't exist. I love the downshift on this. You mentioned it earlier. The sound is beautiful. Yeah, it makes you. It does give you that giddy little feeling, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, the Suzuki's fine. It's good. It's all right. It's middle of the road, 7 out of 10.
I just feel you have to kind of push through it a bit.
I think at lower revs, up and down, both of the Suzuki and the Honda, it unsettles the bike a little bit. Whereas the KTM was smooth as anything. It didn't. You could barely feel that you'd changed.
Perhaps worth noting then also that the quick shifter is an option on the Honda.
Yes.
They have included it on this test bike for us, but it would normally cost £240 and a further £25.20 fitting. Oof. So it's a £265 option on the Honda. It's included as standard on the Suzuki. It's a, what do we say, 300 and something pounds
362
on the KTM.
Yeah.
But we all agree it's still worth it at 360 quid.
£177 option on the MT-07.
And a standard on the Suzuki.
None of them have got heated grips?
No.
No, there is an option on the Suzuki, isn't it? And Yamaha, in fact, and the Honda.
And the Honda, yeah.
181 on the Yamaha, 255 on the Honda.
So it's July. Yeah, we've just had the hottest month in the history of...
I nearly brought my heated jacket today because it was looking a little bit chilly. So you can't get heated grips for the KTM then?
Well, you can just buy some aftermarket ones. KTM's probably gone, what's the point? Why would we charge 400 quid for some... You can get them from... get some Oxford ones. And, the Honda's got storage space. You can put stuff in the boot.
Really?
Yes, it's got space.
How much stuff?
Enough space to put...
Full face helmet?
No. All right. Packet of crisps, some chocolate. You could get a reasonable sized disc lock in there, like an alarm disc lock or something. Getting geeky now. But the others, pretty well nothing.
Good. I just want to make a note about the KTM's mirrors. I thought they were the best, easiest to adjust. I could see the most out of them.
I didn't notice anything about any of the mirrors, so none of them stood out as being good or bad.
I noticed the KTMs were easiest to see out of and adjust as well. I also thought, but having said that, they also look the cheapest.
We have a space to move on, and we move on to that then in that case.
We have 3 Japanese bikes and we have 1 Austrian bike.
Why do you bring up where they're made then, Si?
It is an issue, isn't it? Well, not an issue. People talk about it.
I am a mirror for the readers and the listeners and the viewers' concerns.
So, I think we've become...
I'm staying out of this.
Because I couldn't care less.
But I think we've become used to the idea of globalism in manufacturing, and not all bikes are built where you think they're built, and not all bikes are built in the country where the headquarters are, or indeed where they pay tax. But it's a pleasant surprise to find that the Honda Hornet is built in Japan, whereas CB 500s and maybe even the CBR 650, although I'm not sure, terms and conditions apply, are made in Thailand. Similarly, Suzuki GSX 8S is made in Japan. The Yamaha MT-07, I think, is still made in Japan, although I'm not 100% confident on that one. I know some of its brothers and sisters, the Tenerés and XSR 700s, I think, are made in France by MBK.
Yeah, I think the Yamaha tells you, doesn't it, on the VIN plate?
We should have had a look. But the reason we've kind of really brought this up is because this KTM made in Austria is actually, as far as we know, put together and assembled and manufactured by CF Moto in China. And obviously Chinese manufacturing comes with a reputation in the West, both as something people like to look down on, while simultaneously owning a load of Chinese-made goods and not thinking too hard about it.
Exactly, yeah.
So does it matter then? Does it matter from a riding experience point of view? Because we can't talk about durability, we can't talk about how well they're put together or how well they last over time, because we're here for one day. But from a riding experience, does it matter, or from a pride of ownership thing, does it matter that the KTM is made in China or made by CF Moto?
It's quality control is what matters to me, you know, I think, in your end product. And there are things where you think, well, I would put... I'd hate to think I'm buying something that the people who put it together were in, it's getting really worthy, but in poor conditions, or that there's anything bad happening around it. But having had snapshots of some manufacturing in China, it's not all bad. And I would assume it's down to the quality of the company employing and what it demands from its partners who are putting the stuff together. So you could scrimp and save, maybe, and abuse the manufacturing, or you could demand a quality experience for the staff. Again, we don't know what that is.
I might be naive, but I kind of think that a company like KTM would be fairly ethical in their checking out the quality of their suppliers.
Yeah, you'd hope so. You'd hope so, wouldn't you? You'd hope so.
That would be the starting point.
I think certainly what you can say is from what you feel when you sit on the bike, when you ride the bike, all your touch points, there's nothing in any of it that makes you think it is of a non-KTM, non-Austrian quality thing. All the bits that I looked at and thought that looks a bit cheap. So some of the switchgear and stuff was exactly the same stuff that you'd look at in 2018 on a 790 Duke and go, that looks a bit
cheap.
It's exactly the same stuff you'd look at on a big posh £20,000 1290 Super Adventure and go, that looks a bit.
Leaving the Suzuki out of it for now, I think the KTM looks the best finished, looks the most quality parts out of these two. Following you at one point when you were on the Honda, and I could just see the end of the exhaust. That looks...
Yeah, it's not a highlight, is it, the exhaust cap on the Hornet? In fact, to be honest, the whole of the Hornet, I think it struggles a little bit visually. I think it doesn't have the sort of most aggressive, most dynamic look. And I think it's a bit too closely related to the sort of CB500 side of things, where I think it instills a prejudice in your brain that because the CB500 is a very good bike, very easy to ride, very worthy, very frugal, I think it instills all those same virtues in what you anticipate the Hornet to be. It will also be worthy and frugal and easy to ride and all the rest. And it doesn't make you think this thing's going to set your hair on fire.
Yeah. I think one of my problems is with the frame construction. I think that kind of whole pressed steel thing going on just doesn't look great.
There's bits of that on the Suzuki, but you have to look for them.
You have to look for them. You haven't got the bolted on subframe, which does look pretty. The welding's not pretty. I don't think the red finish on the forks and the frame does it a huge amount of favours. It kind of draws your eye to it, and it's not something you really want to be showing off.
Yeah, there are 4 colours available on the Honda, and not all of them got the red frame, have they?
Obviously, it's important that a bike looks good when you're walking up to it and walking away from it. But I find the cockpit view is really, really important to me. And I've had bikes before where I've gone off the cockpit view. My XR, actually, yes, that's an XR. I just went off the cockpit view. But this is the most disappointing for me to look at. The fin bars.
Is it?
Yeah,
I think even more than the Yamaha. Because the clock's in the wrong place for a start.
Oh, yeah. And put the key, you can't, it's ridiculous, the Yamaha.
Clocks are in front of the key goes in behind it, yeah.
Yeah, and the Yamaha dash, it looks like a tiny cheap phone inside a big box. And
you still have to use a little scroll wheel to adjust things.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And although the switchgear on this is annoying with the indicator that I kept hitting I kept hitting the hazard lights by mistake.
Oh, the hazard lights,
yeah, I kept catching them. But it just looks a bit weak.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I mean a weak design or weak look. It just looks thin. I like big fat bars.
Insubstantial.
Yeah,
not dangerous. Not scary. Just
added to that, I don't really like the look of the dash. It looks a bit like an adventure bike dash, and I don't like the metal styling of the rev counter, digital metal styling. I like the shape and size of the KTM one. It looks like it's a purpose-built dash. The Suzuki, I can't really remember it because you said you like the Suzuki, so...
Yeah, I like the Suzuki Dash as well. I think it's kind of the most clear. I think it used the best use of space, easiest to read at a glance, and most intuitive because there's not like a million submenus or extra hidden little features. Like on the Honda, there's like a little block of 4 different units of information, and then there's 4 different screens of 4 blocks of units of information you can cycle through. That devotes like a third of the space of the TFT to telling you what every single setting of your rider modes are. And you don't need to know that all the time.
They're kind of the clocks, the Honda's clocks are based on kind of the Africa Twin clocks. But the switchgear is substantially more streamlined than the Africa Twin. Yeah,
really?
But it's still, that Africa Twin's got like 11 buttons or something. So that was kind of, I did think, it's better than the Africa Twin. But it's
still not the most intuitive to get through. It still takes you a few stabs to work out how to do it. Whereas the Suzuki has really streamlined switchgear. It's all basically controlled through this little grey rocker on the left-hand side that is kind of really intuitive to get your head behind. The dash, I think, good size, really clear. The KTM's pretty good, although that also has a little feast of sub-menus you kind of can get lost
there's a little
in.
up and a down and a return and a...
Illuminated switchgear, though.
Yeah, true.
Illuminated switchgear.
Backlit switchgear.
Yeah. That's a good point. Here's another good point. Well...
Hang on, we haven't said anything about the MT-07.
It's got some buttons.
It's got a dial on the throttle side that's a pain in the ass.
No, it does actually have things like there's the TFT is new for this year. That's one of the 2 or 3 new things.
It feels a bit small in a big box.
It does look like someone's put a small phone in a big box and gone, look how big this is. I think there's Bluetooth connectivity and some other modes and settings and stuff. But yeah, it's
which you don't have to pay extra for.
Also, someone must have developed somewhere along the line at Yamaha, someone must have said, do you know what would be a good idea? Let's show you the gear that you're in and the 2 either side, just in case you don't know.
What comes next?
You're in 3rd. What could be next? I want to make a point about riding position, just to interrupt with relevance. Obviously, we all have the benefit of riding each bike at our own size and with our own viewpoint and with our own field of vision. I felt as though on the KTM, I was a bit more perched up. Like I likened it. Well, I started thinking about penny farthing, and then I felt like it was on a bicycle with like those back swept things. So I just felt like I was really kind of upright and in the wind. And actually, to see the dash, to see the information was a real.
You have to turn your head.
look down.
And it wasn't in my field of vision.
Yeah,
it wasn't natural. Which probably the Yamaha. You know, give it credit. It is there, mainly because it sticks up so high. But yeah, and we're kind of going back to riding position here. But I felt as though I was in the wind. But you know, because it's just not.
Especially if you're trying to watch speed, with average cameras and all the rest of it, it's important to not have to move your head to see the gloves. Right?
Economy was the next on the list. 3 of these bikes have an identical 14-litre tank, and it's the Honda that has the bigger 15.2. But we have some claimed figures on our cheat sheets, and we have some
Actual
Simon Hargreaves measured,
world
calculated.
Yeah, based on one tankful.
What order should we go in then?
You decide.
Let's start from the left of this excellent sheet you put together. With the least economical bike by claimed figures, is the KTM at 53 miles per gallon.
We got 51.1 miles per gallon.
Very close.
And I'll tell you what, that's a good figure for the stick that the bikes were getting today.
Yeah, we were thrashing on
And it is one of the many benefits of the parallel twin is that they can be made pretty frugal while still delivering a pretty good turn of speed. Because if we were here 20 years ago with a bunch of inline 4s, they would not be getting 53 miles to the gallon.
That is the second best figure that we got from these 4 bikes.
Wow.
So it's the second best. It's in second place.
Next up is Honda with its claim of 65 miles to the gallon.
We got 50.8.
So less than the KTM.
So it's slightly worse than the KTM.
Only by a little bit.
So it's in 3rd place.
And we should say we did this by brimming the tanks and then checking out how much miles we've got, not just relying on the...
Yeah, this isn't taken off the dash.
Next is the Suzuki with 67.23 miles per gallon.
Not a chance.
48.3.
Yeah, that's more like it.
That's a big difference.
That's nearly 20 mpg out.
Yeah, this is why it's important to go and test this stuff and not rely entirely on what you read in the brochure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in the scheme of things, it's not a huge difference. You're talking, what, between the worst, the Suzuki 48.3.
Hang on, we haven't done the MT-07 yet.
I'm just about to segue to it. Go on then, what's the Yamaha?
Well, they claim 67.26 miles per gallon.
67.26.
0.26.
53. Exactly. Which makes it the best.
I don't doubt that it's possible to get 65 mpg plus on those 3 bikes that claim they can do that. But I think your riding style and speed needs to change quite dramatically from proper riding.
Yeah.
As I've said before, I don't hold me to this, but my understanding is that their claimed fuel figures are based on, they're back calculated from exhaust emissions, so that they have to meet an emissions target for Euro 5, and so they are literally collecting the exhaust gases and analysing them, and one of them is that's how they measure how much fuel has gone in the front. They don't actually measure the fuel, they measure how much has been burnt. And because of, I'm assuming the test sequence that they must determine that from is probably not wide open throttle everywhere.
Probably not riding around the fens for all day, is it? Yeah.
It's probably a bit of like cold start and hold it at 30 miles an hour and then do a bit this and a bit of that. And whereas we've been charging about being fairly leery with it.
I'm pretty impressed, to be honest. I'm pretty impressed that they all were kind of there or thereabouts 50 to the gallon. I think that's not a bad figure.
It's not too bad, but they do need bigger tanks because
That is the problem.
I'm riding the Suzuki day to day, and the way I'm riding it, when you go to fill the tank up and you put the key in and you turn it on, it says less than 100 miles range. to start off with.
I don't know whether you guys saw any reserve lights or anything on any of the other bikes, but I was on the Suzuki when that tripped onto its reserve light at 102 miles. And that is disappointing. Yeah. And again, we kind of remember, again, if we were here with the class of bikes from 20 years ago, they would have all done well over 100 miles before going on reserve. They'd have all had much, much bigger fuel tanks.
Worth making the point, actually, because we put 10.65 litres in the Suzuki.
So it should still have had.
So it's still got
4 litres
left.
Even though it was telling me it had 19 miles left.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's probably very cautious.
It is, because I've had it on 0 miles left, and it only took 11 litres, I think.
So we can estimate you should be able to get about 30 or 40 miles fairly safely after the reserve light comes on. Yeah. Don't hold me to that. I'm not coming to rescue you. You made a good point earlier, I think. You said about, but look at the weights.
Uh-huh.
And we haven't mentioned the weights, have we? Nope. The heaviest bike is also the most uneconomical, at a claimed 202 kilograms. Next down...
This is the Suzuki?
The Suzuki, yes, sorry. The Hornet is 190, claimed.
190?
190.
12 kilos less than the Suzuki.
The KTM, 188, claimed. And the MT-07 claimed 184.
So these are all claimed with nearly full fuel tanks and nearly full oil levels. And some of those figures, I think, probably sound a bit higher than we imagine them to. I think people have got an idea in their head that the original Hornet was like 170 kilos. But that was back in the day when they claimed dry figures, which were basically completely meaningless.
Not even a battery in it, was there?
Yeah, in some cases they'd strip the oil out the forks, I think. I put a 2003 Hornet 600 on a set of scales, and it was over 200 kilos.
Right.
So this class of bike is, I'd say, noticeably lighter than middleweights used to be.
Bikes haven't really got heavier, have they? We have got bigger bikes in many cases.
In terms of how they feel, I don't think any of them feel especially heavy. They're all very manageable. I think they're quite impressive to have got the weights down to what they've got them to. But like you say, I would happily trade 3-4 more kilos for 3-4 more litres of fuel in the tank, in all of them.
So, put your money where your mouth is time. I think it's a fairly obvious verdict here, isn't it?
I think if we're going to start backwards, I feel like it's unfair to pick on the MT-07 because it has been a barnstorming bike for 10 years, and there's probably thousands of people watching this who own an MT-07 who think there's nothing wrong with my bike.
There is nothing wrong with it.
There's nothing wrong with it, but the rest of the class has caught up and moved on at a rate of knots. So I think, universally, the one we would be least likely to walk into a dealership and buy is probably the Yamaha, especially if we're talking official price. For the Yamaha to be 500 quid more than the Honda makes it a really difficult sell, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, I do agree. I just think I'd rather, between the two, I'd rather look at the Yamaha, despite finding it a bit plasticky in places and having some real niggles with some of the design touches on it. I'd still rather look at that in my garage than that. But neither of them is the one I'd really want to look at.
I think the one we'd probably all like to ride away from here, like to have enjoyed riding most today, is probably also universal.
Yes.
Yeah.
The KTM?
Definitely.
You've got a look on your face that says I'm going to throw a curveball in at the last minute.
Well, I was chewing it over and thinking, which would I rather have, which would I rather ride on a day-to-day basis? And the only thing about the KTM is that there is something about that switchgear and those clocks that just makes me feel that I like looking at the Suzuki front end better. I like looking at the Suzuki in my garage better than I would the KTM.
Okay.
I'd want to do things to it.
The subframe's cool. I like the way the design of the subframe, the way that comes out. Although that massively long tail is...
Which I'm not offended by at all. I like looking from the back of the bike forward and seeing the way that these sort of, claws reach out.
There's a lot cool about it, but I think we should say, because most people go, yeah, but don't mind, I'm going to put tail tidy on that. But the lamp, the whole tail light is part of that unit.
Yeah,
so that's going to need some engineering.
Not as easy as it sounds. No. Yeah. So and I do love riding it. So I love just short shifting everywhere because that's kind of how I ride now a little bit. I'd struggle.
Okay.
I'd struggle to pick, but I certainly wouldn't argue that that's up at the top between those two. Yeah, yeah, definitely the KTM.
I don't want to put this Honda down though, because there was a lot I was really impressed with that. Personally, I don't like the styling much. I said earlier, didn't I? I'd love to take the engine, gearbox, definitely that quick shift and the sound it makes and everything, and somehow shoehorn that into an original styled Hornet. I'd be like, yeah, I don't care if it doesn't handle that well. If it handled the same as it does now, I'd still think this thing's brilliant. I'd love that. Then that would be the bike I'd have.
I feel like picking between those two is perhaps the trickiest decision, because
What, the Suzuki and the Honda?
between the Suzuki and the Honda, because they do so much differently, but it's not a clear-cut choice either way. I mean, one is much cheaper, one is lighter, one is more powerful, but one is also gruntier, better spec to standard, clearer dash, nicer switchgear. It's a real tough choice between those two.
For a normal riding average person, that I think feels a little bit too oversporty and harsh, whereas this feels a bit more compliant. But once you start edging up into pushing on, then this starts to get a bit messy. And when you get to your level...
For a grown human, that feels more like a proper motorbike, and that feels a little bit kind of like my first bike sort of thing, or my second bike.
Which is no bad thing if you are looking at your first bike or your second bike. In fact, I know someone who's just bought a Hornet 750 to replace their MT-07. They rode around on an MT-07 for a year, jumped on a Hornet for a test ride, fell in love instantly, placed a deposit straight away. There is a lot to be said for that.
Did they ride the Suzuki?
No.
This time next year.
So we've got a winner.
Yes, we have. Well done, Chinese KTM.
Chinese KTM is the winner.
With its MFG.
Yeah, it's a great thing.
Good job. Thank you, boys. Thank you for your time. I'm sure that you have opinions and thoughts. Do feel free to share them in the comment section below, but also on our Facebook channel.
Yeah, we've got a Facebook group. Search on Facebook for BikeSocial, Bennett's BikeSocial, and find our Facebook group. You can chat with us, or chat with normal people if you want. And yeah, get together with us. And also on there, you'll find a lot of the offers we do for BikeSocial members. So get involved, and totally free to join the group. And if you are a Bennett's direct customer, you get BikeSocial membership, so you'll get to take advantage of a lot of those membership offers as well. So just come and say hello, make us feel wanted.
Good. Thanks again. Thanks, boys. See you next time.
White balance.
Test route, and all of us are going to ride all the bikes all the way around.
Oh, naturally.
Yeah.
All right, let's.
One at a time.
Hit stop.
We did talk a lot, didn't we?
That's a long chat. So we've got the long-time category king, the Yamaha MT, the Yamaha, that's a new one.